All right, this video is a bit of a tutorial on getting into crow pose, or really just kind of working out any problems you might have with getting into crow, or figuring out how to balance it with some kind of control. Now, crow is pretty much the first arm balance that most people in yoga start to practice, and it's used in calisthenics as well. You might call it a Frogger shape, something like that. You're basically doing more or less a squat with your legs, or you're keeping the knees bent and you're keeping your legs tucked and putting the weight on your hands. Now, there's a bunch of variations of this shape, so there's definitely more difficult variations to get yourself into, and there's easier versions to play with when you're actually just starting to build this up. And the way I usually cue this in classes is like this. We usually come into it from a forward fold. Now for that, you set your hands down on the floor, press into your palms, dig your fingertips down, lift your heels and touch your knees to your arms, and keep your heels high. Keep your butt up in the air and keep the thighs pulled in close. And then look forward, start to lean forward, keep your grip, and rather than looking down, again, keep looking forward. So when you lean this forward, you can always just feel this out. If you're just building up the strength to come into this might feel like a lot already. And if you're going to take it into balancing, you keep on leaning forward, let your feet lift, big toes to touch, maybe pull your heels in toward your seat. And this is sort of an intermediary version of the pose right here. And it's a good version to play around with. You can actually go in and out of a lot of transitions once you get that version down. Now, the whole thing about coming into that pose, especially if you're just starting to build up some arm strength, it's good to just come into the setup. Take more weight on your hands, keep your body tense as much as you can, and try to hold on to that for time. So if you're practicing on your own and trying to build more strength, see about holding that shape, just coming into the crow setup, leaning into your hands, and trying to stay light in your feet, and go for something between 15 seconds and 1 minute for a hold. And I can't emphasize just how important tension is when you're coming into this and trying to figure out how to balance. And it's the control of tension, and where you hold the tension in your body, where you let the tension go so you're able to move, that is pretty much the skill of coming into some of these poses and positions and moving further, especially when you're going into inversions, because you can't see where your body's at, but you actually have to hold yourself still in space in the parts of your body where it's important and allow yourself to move from the joints that get you into position or get you in and out, or maybe help you to move through transitions. And there's a lot to play around with there. It takes a while to build up that control and to feel out where things are actually at. You can have the strength that you need to actually come into these poses and come into these shapes, but not quite have the connection between the brain and the part of your body that you're trying to control to actually make it happen. And it takes a bit to figure this out and figure out what you need to do to turn things on so you can actually hold the shapes. And if you've got a phone, the way I'm recording right now, use it. I mean, that's one of the nice things about smartphones here. You can take video, you can see what you're doing, and you have evidence for what you're doing that may look quite a bit different from what you have in your head as far as the picture of the pose that you're getting into or the shape that you're getting into. And honestly, it took me about 3 years of practice before I pulled out my phone and finally started recording myself on a regular basis. It's extremely valuable for making progress. Now, to come into the shape, you need to hold on to as much tension as you can. And what I recommend, and actually before I go into that, let me just show you the two extremes. So if you're going to take a very low, easy version of crow, then something a little bit lower than I just did, which is letting your body flatten out. Now, I use this a lot of times when we're gearing up for other poses like firefly, where you have to engage your inner thighs. Now, the nice thing about doing this is it can train you to hold tension even when you don't have a whole lot of core control. Now, when you're coming into this, the hands are the most important first. So hands are down. You can always rotate your fingers out if you have any sort of wrist pain or discomfort. That'll help to just kind of mitigate that. Try not to go out any further than 90 degrees. But grip the floor with your fingertips. Keep your fingertips pressing down and keep that grip on the floor. The hands aren't passive at all. And you want to keep the grip so maybe the fingers will curl up, but the base knuckle of your hand stays down. So you don't want your palm to lift. You don't want to be creating space right here. Keep in mind. Now, as you have that grip, coming into the low version of this pose, basically knees wide, heels up, lean forward, and you're not going to have your butt very high in the air. You're basically flattening your torso out so your chest faces the floor. But keep looking forward rather than down, and then just bring your weight forward to lift your feet. Now, bringing the toes in toward each other helps keep your legs under control. If you let your feet go out wide, you'll start to fall down further. You want to keep at least a little bit of a lift. But if you can hold on to this, just keep everything pulled in as best you can, keep the feet close, and then use your inner thighs. Now squeeze the inner thighs in toward your legs, but then press the arms into the legs as well. And you can even do that before you come up onto your hands. Now when you have the knees wide and start leaning forward, press the arms into the legs, press the legs back into your arms to engage the tension right away. And you're going to feel that traveling up the inner thighs, going into the base of your pelvis. And this is where you start getting into the really deep muscles of your core and controlling the pelvis, basically from the perineum, all right? So there's a lot of muscles that tangle up around the pelvic floor. And once you get used to pulling those in, this makes, over time, this is going to make a lot of these poses much more easy for you. And you're going to figure out how to control your core, the connection of the pelvis to your rib cage, basically, from here. So press down, squeeze the legs in, press the arms into the legs as well, so keep the tension working both directions. Dig your fingertips down, look forward, lean forward. When you lift, keep the gaze forward, let your feet come up to touch. And then to see that you actually have this engagement further, go ahead, lift and lower by squeezing in. And if you're able to draw in strongly enough, you may be able to pull in and reposition the knees onto the arms. And that's a good way of just measuring how far you can go with that tension. It may take you a little while to get to the point where you can actually find that lift. But that's probably the lowest version of crow that you're going to come into. And if you need some help, if you're afraid of going too far and coming into balancing, I'll just pull a yoga block out here. And you can always have this set in front of you. You can always use a pillow if you want something soft. But you're going to set this up so you can bring your hands down, knees wide, lean forward, let your head come forward. I'm going to set this forward just a little bit further so my forehead comes down. And then you can always bring this to the point where maybe your head touches the block and you've got something to perch on here. So this is more of a tripod support. And then just dig into your fingertips and try to look forward as best you can. And that's a good way to get used to lifting your feet up off the floor. And it may take a little while just working that shape to really get the control and get the comfort of being on your hands with your feet lifted. And that is where I would start this. Now, if you're going to take this to a further extreme and really build this up to something quite a bit more difficult than the version of crow that I showed you at the beginning, what's often called crane in yoga is going to be more of a straight arm version of the pose with a very, very deep tuck of the legs. And for this, you start out with the same basic setup from your forward fold. So hands down, fingertips forward, dig down into your fingertips. Keep the arms as straight as you can. Lift your heels. Bring the knees into the armpits as close as you can. And you're coming into a deep fold. There is no space between my thighs and my torso. So I'm tensing up right at the hinge of the hips. This is where the compression comes in. That's where the tension comes in to keep the legs in close. And then look forward and lean. Keep digging down. And when you lean forward, go ahead, pull the feet in. And holding this version is tough. This is probably the most tense version of the pose you can bring this into. And then you can take it to a point where maybe you bring your hips up higher. All right. Now, just work things as best you can. It takes a long time to build the control to hold that with straight arms. But in between, there's a lot you can work on, keep in mind. So if you come into the regular version that I cue during my classes here, again, hands down about shoulder width, dig your fingertips down. Lift the heels, touch them to your arms. Look forward, lean forward, go slow. And then keep that tension, lift your feet. Now, if you can take things further, you can keep the hips up high. Oh, and then maybe press up toward vertical. And that takes a hell of a lot more tension. And you're leaning forward, lifting your hips and trying to keep the legs under control. And then try to land it back down. Now, there's a bunch of versions of the pose that you can take things through, but the engagement that you're looking for tension in your hands, digging your fingertips down. Elbows are pulling in toward each other. So you don't want to just let the arms be passive and let your elbows go wide. And a lot of times training that is just good with this position with the legs low. Squeezing the knees in, pressing the arms in at the same time, and just keeping that tension to keep your arms in place. Once you don't have that feedback from the legs, you have to have the control to pull the elbows in toward each other to really hold onto the shape well. And then thighs pulled in as close as you can. It takes a while to build up that compression as well. There's a lot of elements to this, keep in mind. And you may find you need to keep a gap here to begin, but after a while you can start to train more tension with that, and that is sort of a separate subject. I do believe I have other videos about that. But there's a lot of different elements you need to take things toward, but you need to hold on to your shape for some time. That's the way you build strength doing this sort of thing. It's basically isometrics. And then over time, once you get used to it, once you get more mentally comfortable with what you're doing, it's going to be far more possible to work on other variations of the pose. But anyway, I hope you got the basics down from here and just see where you can start to chip into things a little bit. And keep in mind, if you're watching this video, if you got questions, you're welcome to put a comment down or email me and ask for anything that might get you a little bit further along. I do a lot of these videos here and tutorials, and it's interesting because it's hard to anticipate the questions that people have. Everybody's got different things going on with the body shape or where levels of strength are, and it's a different road for everybody depending on where you're coming from before you start getting into these poses. But anyway, I hope this helps. Thank you very much.